What happens when a beloved Star Wars legend collides headfirst with a late-night host's ego? You won't believe what unfolds when Mark Hamill sits down for what should have been a routine interview on The Late Show, only to find himself trapped in a verbal battleground that would leave audiences stunned and social media exploding. This isn't just another celebrity spat. This is the moment when professionalism died on live television, and respect went out the window faster than a TIE fighter in the Death Star trench. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two entertainment titans clash in the most uncomfortable television moment of the year. The Ed Sullivan Theater buzzed with its usual pre-show energy as Mark Hamill emerged from behind the iconic blue curtain, his signature warm smile lighting up the stage. The audience erupted in applause. This was Luke Skywalker himself, the man who had captured hearts across generations. Dressed in a sharp navy blazer, Hamill waved enthusiastically, soaking in the adoration from fans who had waited hours just to catch a glimpse of their childhood hero. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Hamill," Stephen Colbert announced from behind his desk, his voice carrying that familiar late-night showman energy. But there was something different in his tone tonight. A subtle edge that sharp-eared viewers might have caught, like a discordant note in an otherwise perfect symphony. Hamill settled into the guest chair with practiced ease, adjusting his jacket as the applause died down. "Stephen, great to be here," he said, his voice carrying that distinctive warmth that had made him not just a screen legend, but a beloved figure across social media platforms. Mark, Colbert began, leaning back in his chair with what appeared to be a casual posture, but his eyes held an intensity that didn't match his relaxed demeanor. "You know, I have to ask, and our viewers are dying to know, how does it feel to be part of a franchise that some people say has completely lost its way?" The question hung in the air like a thermal detonator with its pin pulled. Hamill's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, so brief that most viewers probably missed it, but the cameras caught everything. This wasn't the typical softball question that guests expected on late-night television. "Well, Stephen," Hamill replied carefully, his diplomatic actor's training kicking in, "I think Star Wars continues to evolve and reach new audiences. The franchise has always been about hope, and I think that message resonates now more than ever." But Colbert wasn't satisfied with the diplomatic response. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his desk, fingers steepled like a prosecutor preparing to deliver a devastating cross-examination. "But come on, Mark. You've been pretty vocal on social media about your, let's call them concerns, about the direction of the franchise. Don't you think fans deserve some honesty about what's really happening behind the scenes?" The studio audience began to sense the shift in energy. The comfortable late-night banter was morphing into something else entirely, something that felt more like an interrogation than an interview. Hamill shifted slightly in his chair, his media-trained instincts telling him to deflect, but his genuine nature fighting against the carefully constructed Hollywood facade. "I think fans deserve great storytelling," Hamill responded, his voice maintaining its measured tone despite the increasingly hostile line of questioning. "And I believe that's what they're getting. Every generation discovers Star Wars in their own way." Colbert's laugh had a sharp edge to it now, cutting through the studio like a lightsaber through blast doors. "That's a very diplomatic answer, Mark, but we both know there's more to it than that. You've made it pretty clear that you're not entirely happy with how your character was handled in the recent films." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees as the interview took this unexpected turn toward confrontation territory, setting the stage for something that would make television history for all the wrong reasons. Hamill's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his decades of experience in front of cameras the only thing keeping his composure intact. But Colbert wasn't finished. He was just getting started, and the gloves were about to come off completely. "Look, Mark," Colbert continued, his voice taking on a condescending tone that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "We're all adults here. You don't have to give us the corporate Disney talking points. Your tweets have been pretty clear about your feelings. Why not just be honest with us?" The host's words hit like a slap across the face. Hamill's eyes flashed with something that viewers had never seen from the typically gentle actor. A spark of genuine anger that transformed his entire demeanor in an instant. "Honest?" Hamill repeated, his voice still controlled but now carrying an underlying steel that would have made Darth Vader proud. "You want honest, Stephen? I think honest would be conducting an interview instead of whatever this ambush is supposed to be." The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Even the production crew behind the cameras stopped their usual bustling, sensing that something was going terribly wrong. This wasn't playful late-night television banter anymore. This was personal. Colbert's response was immediate and cutting. "An ambush? Really? I'm asking you questions about your own public statements. If that feels like an ambush, maybe you should think about what you're putting out there on social media." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable now, and Hamill's friendly demeanor began to crack like ice under pressure. His hands, which had been resting casually on the chair's armrests, slowly clenched into fists. "My social media?" Hamill's voice rose slightly, though he was clearly fighting to maintain control. "I share my thoughts with fans who've supported me for decades. I don't recall signing up to be cross-examined by someone who seems more interested in creating controversy than having a conversation." The audience was now completely silent, the usual supportive energy replaced by a thick tension that seemed to fill every corner of the Ed Sullivan Theater. Some viewers at home would later describe the moment as watching a car crash in slow motion. You knew it was going to get worse, but you couldn't look away. Colbert leaned back in his chair with a smirk that would have made the Emperor himself jealous. "Creating controversy? Mark, you're the one who's been cryptically tweeting about your concerns for months. I'm just asking you to explain what you mean instead of hiding behind vague social media posts." That was the moment everything changed. Hamill's entire body language shifted as he leaned forward in his chair, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more weight than if he had shouted. "Hiding?" The single word hung in the air like a challenge. "Stephen, I've been in this business for over 4 decades. I've never hidden from anything, and I'm not about to start now. But there's a difference between honest conversation and whatever game you think you're playing here." The confrontation was escalating beyond anything the show's producers had ever anticipated, and the real fireworks were just beginning to ignite. Colbert's expression hardened as he sensed Hamill's rising anger, but instead of backing down, he doubled down with the ruthless precision of a seasoned interrogator. "A game? Mark, this is television. Everything is a game, but you've been playing it for decades, so don't act like you're some innocent victim here." The words hit Hamill like a physical blow. His face flushed red, and for the first time in the interview, his voice cracked with genuine emotion. "Victim? Are you serious right now? I came here as a guest on your show, Stephen. I didn't come here to be attacked by someone who clearly has some kind of agenda." The studio audience was now visibly uncomfortable, some covering their mouths in shock, others looking around nervously as if seeking an escape route from the train wreck unfolding before them. The cameramen continued filming, but their movements had become hesitant, unsure whether they should keep rolling or cut away from this disaster. Colbert's laugh was cold and calculated. "Agenda? My agenda is getting honest answers instead of the scripted nonsense that passes for celebrity interviews these days. But apparently that's too much to ask from someone who made his career playing a character who's supposed to represent hope and heroism." That was the breaking point. Hamill's eyes blazed with fury as he shot forward in his chair, his voice no longer controlled or diplomatic. "Don't you dare lecture me about hope and heroism. You sit behind that desk every night taking cheap shots at people while hiding behind the pretense of comedy. At least when I play a character, I'm honest about it." The accusation hung in the air like a thermal detonator about to explode. Colbert's mask of professional composure finally slipped, revealing something ugly underneath. Cheap shots? You think holding public figures accountable is taking cheap shots? Maybe you've been living in your fantasy world so long you've forgotten what real accountability looks like. Hamill stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that echoed through the deadly quiet studio. His hands were shaking with rage as he pointed directly at Colbert. Accountability? This isn't accountability, Stephen. This is ambush television designed to humiliate your guests for ratings. You want to talk about fantasy worlds? You've created one where you think being cruel makes you clever. The host remained seated, but his voice turned venomous. Cruel? I'm asking you direct questions about your own public statements. If you can't handle that level of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be making those statements in the first place. Or maybe you should stick to comic conventions where everyone treats you like royalty. The insult about comic conventions, events, where Hamill regularly met with fans who genuinely loved him, was the final straw. The beloved actor's face contorted with an anger that shocked everyone present. You know what, Stephen? You're absolutely right about one thing. I should stick to places where people actually have respect for their guests and basic human decency. Hamill ripped off his wireless microphone with such force that the battery pack clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the stunned silence like a gunshot. His movement was so sudden and decisive that even the seasoned production crew froze in place. But Colbert wasn't finished yet, delivering one final devastating blow that would seal his fate. "Running away, Mark!" Colbert's voice cut through the tension like a blade, his words dripping with contempt. "I guess that's what heroes do when they can't handle a little criticism. Maybe that's why your character had to die in the movies. Even the writers knew you couldn't handle carrying the franchise anymore." The studio gasped collectively, a sound that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. Even the hardened production crew, who had seen countless celebrity meltdowns over the years, stood frozen in disbelief. Colbert had just crossed a line that no professional host should ever cross, attacking not just Hamill's career, but the very character that had defined generations of childhoods. Hamill stopped dead in his tracks, his back still turned to Colbert. For a moment that felt like an eternity. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. The silence was so complete that viewers at home could probably hear their own heartbeats. When Hamill finally turned around, his face was a mask of controlled fury that would have made the Emperor himself step back in fear. "You know what, Stephen?" Hamill's voice was dangerously quiet, each word measured and deliberate. "I've met a lot of people in this business. Good people, bad people, and people who just don't know any better. But I've never met anyone quite like you. Someone who mistakes cruelty for intelligence and thinks that tearing people down makes them look bigger." The accusation hit Colbert like a physical blow. His face flushed red as he realized he had gone too far, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. Instead, he doubled down with the desperation of a man who knew he was drowning. "Oh, spare me the moral lecture from someone who's made millions playing pretend. At least I deal with real issues instead of hiding behind lightsabers and fairy tales." The insult about fairy tales, referring to the saga that had brought hope to millions of fans worldwide, was the moment that sealed Colbert's reputation forever. Hamill's expression shifted from anger to something far more devastating: disappointment. "Real issues?" Hamill shook his head slowly, his voice carrying a sadness that was somehow more powerful than any shout could have been. "Stephen, the fairy tale you're mocking has taught children about courage, sacrifice, and standing up to bullies for nearly 50 years. What exactly are you teaching them right now?" The question hung in the air like an indictment, and for the first time in the interview, Colbert seemed to falter. The studio audience, which had been silent throughout the confrontation, began to murmur among themselves. Some were shaking their heads in disgust, Others were already reaching for their phones to capture what they knew would become viral social media content within hours. Colbert tried to recover, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "I'm teaching them that public figures should be held accountable for their statements and actions." "No," Hamill replied with devastating simplicity. "You're teaching them that it's acceptable to humiliate people for entertainment. You're teaching them that cruelty is comedy. And you're teaching them that success gives you the right to tear others down." The words landed with the force of a Death Star superlaser, and Colbert's face went pale as he realized the magnitude of what he had done. The camera captured every moment of his dawning horror as the implications of his behavior began to sink in. But Hamill wasn't done yet, and his final words would echo through social media for weeks to come. Hamill took a step closer to Colbert's desk, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience and the moral authority of someone who had genuinely touched millions of lives. "You know what the difference is between us, Stephen? When I played Luke Skywalker, I understood that with great power comes great responsibility. You have a platform that reaches millions of people every night, and you've chosen to use it to humiliate a guest who came here in good faith." The words cut through the studio like a lightsaber through steel. Colbert sat frozen behind his desk, his face a mask of barely contained panic, as he realized the full scope of his catastrophic mistake. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of his professional suicide for posterity. "I've spent my entire career trying to bring hope and joy to people," Hamill continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. "You've spent tonight trying to tear that down for what? Ratings? A viral moment? Well, congratulations, Stephen. You got your viral moment." The studio audience, which had been silent throughout the confrontation, began to stir. Some were already standing, their faces showing a mixture of disgust and disbelief at what they had witnessed. Others were frantically typing on their phones, uploading clips and comments that would soon flood social media platforms. Colbert finally found his voice, but it came out as a desperate whisper. "Mark, I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean what?" Hamill's voice rose with righteous indignation. "You didn't mean to ambush me? You didn't mean to insult my career? You didn't mean to mock something that brings joy to millions of people? Which part exactly didn't you mean, Stephen?" The host's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. He had been completely disarmed by Hamill's moral authority and the undeniable truth of his accusations. Hamill straightened his jacket with dignity and looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience at home with the same warmth and sincerity that had made him beloved for generations. "To everyone watching at home, I want you to know that you deserve better than this. You deserve hosts who respect their guests, entertainment that uplifts instead of destroys, and media that brings people together instead of tearing them apart." He turned back to Colbert one final time, his voice carrying a sadness that was more devastating than any anger could have been. "And Stephen, I hope someday you remember what it feels like to be kind. Because right now you've forgotten, and it shows." With those words, Mark Hamill walked off the Late Show stage with his head held high, leaving behind a studio full of stunned silence and a host whose career would never recover from the self-inflicted wounds of that disastrous interview. The confrontation lasted only 15 minutes, but its impact would reverberate through the entertainment industry for months. Social media exploded with support for Hamill and condemnation for Colbert's behavior. The hashtag #RespectMarkHamill trended worldwide within hours, while the Colbert's disgrace followed close behind. Within a week, The Late Show's ratings had plummeted to historic lows. Sponsors began pulling their advertisements, and CBS executives were forced to issue public apologies. Colbert himself was placed on temporary leave while the network conducted an internal review of the incident. The confrontation had indeed made television history, but not in the way Stephen Colbert had intended. Instead of creating a memorable interview, he had created a masterclass in how not to treat guests, while Mark Hamill had demonstrated the power of dignity, grace, and moral courage under pressure. The incident served as a stark reminder that, in an age of toxic media culture, there were still people willing to stand up for basic human decency, and that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply walking away with your integrity intact.